Hi, good morning, good afternoon, whenever it is that you're watching this Thursday Thoughts. This is the first Thursday Thoughts for the month of May. And we have now been doing this for several weeks. I think that most of us are already pretty accustomed to what we're doing with this. And so I'm going to get right into it. Today, the Thursday Thoughts is going to be a little bit of theological reflection, and I wanted for us to consider the question regarding God's sovereignty in a time like this. What is the role? What's the extent of God's sovereignty at a time like this? Now, what I mean specifically about this is we know that we're in a pandemic and we know that we're in quarantine. And thankfully, as far as I know, nobody in our church has been seriously affected in terms of their health, by health concerns with the coronavirus. We have had several people who are still dealing with job related issues, financial issues, and so we feel it. Maybe you don't feel it. I'm going to admit to you that other than being home with Cindy and the boys all day, I don't really feel it. I don't feel, and again, it's not to say that I want to be very sensitive to the fact that it hasn't actually hit us in a very personal, impactful way. That being said, maybe you're talking to people who are feeling it, and they'll ask you, is God in control of this situation? Is he sovereign over this situation? If he's in control of this situation, it leads us to ask a few questions. Why can't he make it go away? Why can't he heal those who are sick? Why can't he prevent deaths of those who are dying? Why is it that we experience these types of tragedies at different levels, at differing levels, and some of us are experiencing it at a tremendous degree? Particularly those of you who work or own small businesses. This is impacting you much more than it is for those who work for big, huge companies where they can withstand a little bit of downturn. What does it mean that God is sovereign and in control of these situations? Did he cause it? Did he cause coronavirus? Is it our job to go and to figure out what his purpose was or what his purpose is in causing this, if in fact we think that he caused it? When it comes to the sovereignty of God, I want to stop for a moment and consider what I would say are sort of the two extremes regarding God's sovereignty. The first extreme with regards to God's sovereignty is that, in fact, he is in charge of everything. He is this extreme position is that everything is guided and caused by the hand of God. Everything can be attributed back to him. Every situation can be put on his plate, on his shoulders, on his responsibility, because he is the cause and the author of everything. To the extent that, for example, before I started recording, I changed my shirt. I took off the shirt that I was wearing. I put on this collared shirt. I figured it's probably a little bit more presentable, a little bit more professional. This position would say that God even caused me to do that. God caused me to choose this shirt as opposed to something else that I wanted to wear. He influenced the decision from the very beginning. Now we see this in Scripture, and I'm going to show you this in a couple of different places here. We see this. Let me get going here. with regards to Noah and his ark, Noah and the flood. Now, let me read this for you. This is going to be an excerpt from Genesis chapter 6, not the entire 13 verses, but parts of it. It says, when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who are of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I've made them. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Pretty clear in this passage that this flood, this worldwide flood, was directly caused by God. It was not something that God could foresee coming. He caused it. He caused it, and he specifically was the author of it for a very, very predetermined purpose. We see again in Genesis chapter 41, situation with Joseph, and when he's trying to rise in the eyes of Pharaoh. Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh says to Joseph, behold, in my dream I was standing on the banks of the Nile. 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up out of the Nile and fed in the reed grass. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and thin, such as I had never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the thin, ugly cows ate up the first 7 plump cows. But when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were still as ugly as at the beginning. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream 7 ears growing on one stalk, full and good. 7 ears withered, thin and blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And I told it to the magicians, and there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. And I'm going to stop right there again, because in this passage, Joseph interprets the dream that Pharaoh has, and Joseph tells Pharaoh, God's telling you ahead of time what he's going to do. He's going to cause a world, or at least in that area, in that region, he's going to cause a famine. He's going to cause a famine to come, and prior to the famine, there are going to be 7 years of plenty, but then there are going to be 7 years of famine. And so if you know this information ahead of time, what you do is you corner the market. And that's exactly what Pharaoh did. Pharaoh, because of this information, what God was going to do, he had Joseph in charge of the farm, the land, the crops. And Joseph, in those 7 plump years, just set aside tons and tons of grain so that in the 7 lean years, they would be ready. In these two situations, we see that God controls these natural disasters. He causes the natural disasters. He tells the people ahead of time, I am going to do this. Is it possible that this is the situation that we're in? Not that he gave us prior warning, but that this is caused by God. This is a worldwide pandemic. This is going to be one extreme that says that God's in control of every single detail of the world. On the other extreme, it's the exact opposite, that God doesn't control any of these things. This view would look at God and say that God made the world, God created the world like a clock maker. And he made the world, and then he wound it up, and then he just let it go. And that clock, for the rest of time, will just do what it was going to do, with God standing aside and just watching the clock do its thing. This is the position, actually, of the founding forefathers of the United States of America. They were, this is called what they were deists. And they believed that God was like this, that God would wind up, that God created the world and wound up the clock, but that God was no longer involved in the world anymore after that. You have these two extremes. One where God is in control of everything, and one where God is in control of nothing. And it's pretty easy to see why there are problems with both of these positions. On the one hand, if God is in control of everything, I think the more that you experience life, the more that you see how much misery there is in the world, the more that you see how much evil and wretchedness and disparity there is in the world, you say to yourself, the God that I know from Scripture, he caused this? You see, if you take the position that God is in control of everything, is he in control of you when you sin against him? Is he in control of you when you lose your temper and your tongue says things you regret? Is he in control of you when your eyes see something and you lust after that thing? Is he in control of you? Is he in control of you when you're so irritated and angry that hatred builds in your heart towards someone else? Is he in control of you? Is he in control when you are filled with jealousy and envy because someone else has something you don't? I don't think God is in control of these things. God doesn't ever cause you to sin. Scripture even tells us that. He cannot be the author of sin. How can we say that he controls everything when he cannot also be the one to cause people to sin? And again, I think that the more you see the world, the more you see just how broken the world is. The older I get, the more that I see, the more I travel, the more times we go to Mexico, the more I see just some of what's just simply awful relative to our comfort here. You know, to say that, wow, God, you're in control. You caused this. It's very hard. It's a little bit short-sighted. It's a little bit narrow. And I don't think it's true. On the other hand, if you take the other extreme, God's not in control of everything, of anything, it's pretty easy to see the flaws in that thinking. If he made the world and wound up the clock and let it go and just let it do what it was going to do, and never ever again broke into history and caused anything, well then, Jesus Christ never comes into the world. Jesus Christ is God reaching down from heaven and influencing and affecting the world for eternity. It was that moment in time when God said to his son, Jesus, now is the time. You know, the plan that we talked about before the foundation of the world, now is the time for you to do it. And Jesus said, I'm on my way. God cannot be a God who made the world, wound it up, and let it go. It cannot be. You can't say that he has no control over this situation, because God frequently affects world issues, frequently affects things in the world and in your own life. And so we're left with this question: how much in control is God in this situation? I want to leave you with three thoughts. This is just my very quick summary conclusion for a Thursday thought, not meant to be a class. I mean, people have written books and books, volumes and volumes on this very one topic, and I'm doing it in 10 minutes. So I realize that it's going to be pretty much on the surface here. First of all, I want to talk about what the word sovereign means. Sovereign, reign. It's a word that only kings get to use. And God is the king, and God says, I am sovereign. And what that means is that God can do whatever he wants. Sovereign means that God can do whatever he wants. He's not limited by anything. He's not limited by money. He's not limited by time. He's not limited by authority. He's not limited by rule. He makes the rules. He gets to do whatever pleases him. He doesn't ask. He doesn't need to wait. He just acts. He's limited by nobody. That doesn't mean that he always acts. It just means that when he wants to act, he can. He does. Just as a king is sovereign, so is the Lord sovereign. Secondly, sovereign with regards to God means also that he sees all and he knows all. Now, again, this is not necessarily him acting. This is him seeing the future, you might say. He sees down the annals of time, and he sees what's going to happen, and he knows what's going to happen. He doesn't necessarily cause everything to happen, but nothing surprises him. Nothing that happens is a shock to God. You think about any kind of tragedy or awful circumstance in your life, in your personal life, in the world's life, nothing was a surprise to God. 9/11 wasn't a surprise to God. Hitler wasn't a surprise to God. COVID-19 is not a surprise to God. There is a very, very important distinction between God knowing what's going to happen and God causing what's going to happen. You see, when I go out and I try to teach my son how to ride a bike, we've taken off the training wheels and he's riding, and he's nervous. And so I tell him, I'm going to hold the bike from behind so that you can learn your balance. And after a few pedals, I let go. I let go because I know that he needs to learn that balance. But I also know that he will fall, because that's what people do when they learn how to ride a bike. Now, there's a huge difference between me letting go and letting him fall versus me taking out my kid and saying, we're going to learn how to ride a bike. And here we go. You're going to ride. And then right as I let go, I push him down. There's a huge difference between the two. A sovereign God doesn't necessarily have to cause everything, but he certainly knows everything. I think about every tragedy in my own personal life. And I know that many of you who've been in my church, in this church for a long time, who've heard me speak about these things, I've had quite a few things. And I don't blame God for any of them. I know that he knows. He knew ahead of time every single one of them. But he didn't cause. He doesn't have to cause that. He doesn't have to stir in my parents' body to cause a cell to become cancerous. He doesn't have to cause it. He doesn't have to cause people to be distracted in order for there to be car accidents. He doesn't have to cause people to be unhealthy for people to suffer the effects of being unhealthy. So far, again, The sovereignty of God. God being sovereign means that he gets to do whatever he wants. God being sovereign means that he knows everything, although I don't think he causes everything. And finally, God being sovereign means that he can make things right. And this maybe is the part that I want to leave you with, the part that brings me the most comfort. God is able to take the human garbage that we experience, and he's able to weave it into something beautiful. He's able to take the human trash, the human tragedy, the human tribulation, the human sinfulness, and he's able to redeem it and make it right and make it good. Again, everyone's favorite verse, Romans chapter 8, verses 28 and 29. It says basically that we know God causes all things to work together for good for those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son. Now, what that tells us is a couple of things. One, God is able to cause all of these things to work together for a good result. He doesn't necessarily have to cause these things, but he's able to take something that is not good and weave it together to result in good for me and for you. And then in verse 29, it tells us what that good is. It tells us that the good that God causes for us is to make us more like Christ, to be conformed to his image. And so I think to myself, this is something I personally hang my hat on. I don't blame God for this pandemic. He didn't cause it. But I also know that he's going to use it in my life, in the life of our church, in the life of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. He's going to use it for his purpose. You see, that's what he can do. He is the ultimate chess master who's playing a novice, who's playing a beginner. He doesn't dictate what the beginner does or doesn't do, but it doesn't matter what the beginner does. It doesn't matter what's on the board. The chess master is able to do everything he wants to make the game work out the way that he desires for his purpose. At this time, in this way, particularly for those of you who have experienced tremendous suffering from this, my prayer and my heart goes out to you. Please, please remember, I don't blame God. We should not blame God, but continue to lean on him because we know he can weave this together for the good of those who love him, to bring us more into the image of his Son. I hope that this Thursday thought has been helpful and beneficial for you. I really appreciate your feedback, the kind feedback that I've gotten from you and Theo has gotten from us regarding these Thursday thoughts. Hope you have a wonderful week. Looking forward to seeing you on Sunday. Take care.